this is something interesting for us to notice about conflict and threats. And even when we have that kind of threat reaction, when we then can like reconcile whether the threat was real or not, it does strengthen the trust between us.
Welcome to the Wicked Truth podcast, Third Things First, where we imagine life after conflict. I'm Suzanne Ross, your host for conversations with peace builders who have learned through long experience how to free communities caught in conflict for something better. A third thing is a term from conflict resolution. It refers to a work of art, like a movie or a play, that rival sides can watch and react to from their own perspective. By inviting reactions without judgment, the third thing creates a safe space to respect differences and to recognize a shared longing for a more peaceful future. When the third thing comes first, it becomes possible to heal conflict and trauma from the recent past or that has lingered for generations. We hope that Third Things First will be your go-to place to renew hope in a future where everyone can flourish in peace. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Gena St. David to the podcast. Gena works at the intersection of psychology, Christian theology, and neurobiology. And I invited her to talk to us today about what is going on in our brains when we feel betrayed. Betrayal and misplaced trust are central problems in Wicked, and so I have been thinking about them for a long time. Unfortunately, Elphaba's discovery that the wonderful wizard is a charlatan and worse, an unrepentant scapegoater feels a little too on the nose for many of us right now. In this episode, I'm going to ask Gena what is going on in our brains when we put our trust in all the wrong places, and what her research has revealed about how we can learn to trust ourselves and each other again. So, Gena, it's a joy to welcome you to Third Things First. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. And gosh, I just love that phrase and you bringing our attention to that idea of a third thing that we both can, you know, put our attention on that could bridge divides. Yeah. Thank you for hosting this conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I mean, we've gotten to know each other over the years, Gena, and um, I was going to say we have a shared interest, but I think it's a shared passion for the theology of James Allison and for nonviolence and the practice of nonviolence. So I'm just really delighted to be able to talk with you about it, those things and other things today. So Gena, yes, you are a psychotherapist and professor of counselor education and director of the Wesendorf Center for Christian Ministry and Vocation at the Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas, where you're coming to us from
Yes.
today, I think. Um, and as you immersed yourself in brain science, you began to see nonviolence not just as an ethical idea, but as something we can cultivate toward ourselves, other people, animals, and the planet. Your book, The Brain and the Spirit, which I've read a number of times now, listens deeply to scripture through the earpiece of brain science. And you have a new book coming out shortly, I believe, called The Nonviolent Brain. And it's an empirical study of nonviolent practitioners around the globe who gave you a front row seat to nonviolence in action. And that's what I love about you, Jen, is you're a scholar, but you're so interested in the practice of all of this. And so your results show how small everyday practices can create meaningful ripples in our lives and our communities. So I'm excited to welcome you again to Third Things First. Let's just jump right in from the side of the brain, the neurobiology, because that is something so fascinating that not many theologians are also into neurobiology. So I find that really fascinating. Um, So let's start this way, Jenna. So during conflict, stress is very high, and we're right to be cautious about where we're placing our trust. We can't
Mhm.
just trust anybody during a conflict, right? So, can you just talk a little bit about what is going on in our brains when we're in those high stress situations?
Yes, yeah. And I'm so appreciative of your interest in this part of the conversation about peace building, and I've so enjoyed you bringing me into the community of peace builders, which I don't organically identify as, because I have such admiration for those who are on the front lines of doing conflict resolution and peace building in hot zones of conflict. And I do much of my work until recently in this very safe second floor office on this very gorgeous leafy campus in a very safe neighborhood. And I'm writing about people who are putting nonviolence and peace building into practice, um, and and achieving really like neurobiologically surprising outcomes from it. But I haven't until recently myself been practicing it, and I have been recently since this current administration was reelected. I knew in my bones immediately after the most recent presidential election that I needed to start conditioning my own nervous system to be able to put into practice the things that I've been studying all this time and observing really brave, courageous people doing. So, um, what's happening in our brain during moments of conflict and let's call it stress. A lot of my neurobiology work is looking at this continuum of safety versus stress. And we can think of stress as um, energy in the body, tension in the body, or demands on the energy in the body. And we need a little bit of stress to function well, to grow and to change, but too high of stress will tend to send the electric current in our brain down into our brainstem, which most people have some rudimentary idea of the brain as more or less in three segments. And so there's the upper brain, is where all the things that we think of when we think of being human or being at our best exist in this upper brain of like creativity and compassion and empathy and perspective taking and um, patience and holding on to our values. That happens up here. And then the lower brain, the brainstem back here, is exists entirely to keep us safe in danger. And so it's sometimes called the lizard brain. It's the only part of the brain that we share in common with reptiles, and it is almost entirely preoccupied with two questions: am I about to eat or be eaten? And so when it perceives that we might be about to be eaten, uh, it essentially quiets down everything else that happens up here in the brain, and all of the electric current, blood, and oxygen and energy goes down to the lower part of our brain that is simply trying to get us out of danger, either through fighting it, fleeing, or freezing, are the three classic. And then there's these other two that we've discovered: fawning and faking it. And so there's really like five more or less coping strategies to keep us safe and get us out of danger or protect somebody that we care about. So, um, in conflict, particularly betrayal conflict, is a unique kind of danger, because the precursor to betrayal is that we thought we were safe. And so it's both maybe that the environment or the relationship betrayed us, but also our own perceptive system betrayed us. And that's its own kind of terror, that can I trust myself to perceive threats accurately?
Right. Yeah. Wow. Because then if you can't perceive real threats accurately, you could be in danger all the time. So are you like at a
Chronically.
high, yeah, so you're in a high threat mode, if you will, right? All the time. Because I mean, let's just look at that. What happens? So because there are real threats and real people who you shouldn't trust, right? But sometimes there are people and situations we should trust, but we can't. we don't for some reason. So what makes us perceive a threat to be real? What I mean,
Mhm,
does it matter whether it's real or not as far as your brain goes? But what's happening when you perceive a threat to be real?
mhm. Well, so, a story that comes to mind that I write about in my book that's like a really, kind of a sweet, endearing, example of misperceiving a threat to be real that wasn't was early on in my relationship with my husband. um, it was the first night, this is several years ago, it was the first night that we had, moved in, we had merged our homes together, and so we'd gone through this, really moving is stressful, it's on one of the top 5 lists of the most stressful life events, and so, we'd done all this physical labor of, like, moving our things and getting settled in, and it was the first night that we were spending together in the home together, and I was just looking forward to that final peaceful moment where we would turn in together and kind of celebrate that we'd done this hard thing together and have this like peaceful connection. And as it got closer and closer to the end of the night, he was like distracted. He was looking for things. He couldn't find what he was looking for. He wasn't communicating a whole lot. And then he disappeared for a while and I didn't know where he was. And so I just ended up like getting ready for bed, going in, brushing my teeth, turning out the light, crawling into bed. And I was close to tears at that point, and I thought, are we in a conflict that I don't know about? Did something happen between us? Is he regretting that we moved in together? What's happening? And I was just like in kind of a panic. And so you can see what my brain was doing was going into threat mode. Like there's a danger here. There's a threat to our connection. I don't know what it is. I'm frightened now. And so my whole body was having a kind of a panic reaction. So then he comes in finally, and I'm close to tears, and I say, "Are we disconnected right now? What's happening?" And he said, "Oh," and he sat down on the edge of the bed, and he said, and so I had a race on the calendar for the next day. I'd been training for a big race, and he had been making signs to cheer for me the next morning, and he wanted it to be a surprise, so he had been kind of secretive in this very he was like, "No," so then he just like ruined the surprise and told me, and then I felt immediate relief. And so this is something interesting for us to notice about conflict and threats. And even when we have that kind of threat reaction, when we then can like reconcile whether the threat was real or not, it does strengthen the trust between us. And so then immediately when realized what was happening, that the threat was not real, I was responding to cues that certainly reminded me of past situations where, somebody was that we were in conflict or there was a disconnect,
Yeah.
he or I or somebody else, and so that's what will often happen is our brain is reacting to cues that remind us of something in the past that was real. So oftentimes the reaction is to something true. It's just not actually happening in the present moment. It's actually reacting to something in the past that feels present now. And so immediately after I realized what that he was doing this actually very sweet, loving thing, my brain was flooded with the neurotransmitters for trust are largely oxytocin, which just feels exquisite in the body. It's just this like warm, delicious, pleasant
Mm.
feeling neurotransmitter. And so like it floods the body. I feel relief. Then I feel tears of like gratitude and love. So it was actually this very sweet connective moment of trust building, but it required a little moving through panic first to get to there.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's so interesting that a lot of times we're reacting to something from our past that sort of we've learned to recognize as a signal that either I'm in danger or I'm in a safe place. So, like, how do you navigate that? Like, how do you figure out, especially, that's I love that your example was so personal because you could actually talk to the person, you know? Um, because right now we're dealing with, I think, situations in the broader culture where our trust in our political leaders is being fractured. And we're not sure. I know I have lost faith many times in political leaders, and you wonder, or at one point, I sort of just withdrew altogether from thinking, well, I can never judge who to vote for because I don't know how. I can't figure out how to know who they are. And so there's all these different ways you react in these situations. But I'm wondering, how we can learn to trust. When is it appropriate to place our trust in someone or something? Are there cues we can, or practices we can, that can help us navigate that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll share with you some of what I've discovered through my research, and then I'll offer another story as an example. So, um, you even in how you're framing these questions today, Suzanne, you're inviting us to notice that trust often starts with ourselves. And so that would be an encouragement that's borne out through the neurobiology and the research is like trust what we're feeling, trust the reactions that our body is having, not the meaning we're making of it, but the body doesn't lie. That's Bessel van der Kolk. It's telling us something true, either about a threat in the past that we haven't fully processed and integrated so that we really don't know how to make use of that information today to genuinely keep ourselves safe, or maybe there is a threat in the present that we're paying attention to. So trusting the body is telling us something and not overriding that fear response is maybe a good first starting place. And then listening to the body and interrogating. Okay, so like, does this remind me of something from my past? Okay, let me put my attention there and try to understand it. What was the threat there? When did I know it was over? What lessons did I learn from it? How can I apply that today? And then, if I'm not sure if the current situation is trustworthy or not, I'm a big fan of running small experiments, testing it out, both
Right.
relationally and systems wise. And, the story that comes to mind that we can go, in as much or a little detail into is in my research on nonviolence, I've been interviewing practitioners across the world, many of whom you have introduced me to, who are practicing nonviolence either towards other humans, or non-human animals, or the planet, or some
Mhm,
combination of the three, right?
mhm,
And, And so particularly like it's wonderfully put me in community with people who are very much practicing nonviolence towards animals here in the US and have come to this awareness of the animal agriculture industry, or like for instance the medical research on animals industry, and how there's a sense of betrayal often when people first start to pull back the curtain and look at what's actually happening. And so I've been getting involved in movements of nonviolent protest and resistance and action, seeking to affect change, to interrupt and end the violence towards animals, and or rescue animals out of those industries. And I've been learning a lot. So when I say like, I mostly do this work academically in my safe office, but like, I'm now getting more into the fray of the like practicing nonviolent action
mhm,
in an embodied way, and I'm learning it often through these movements to try to rescue animals from violence. And so the betrayal of like discovering the level of power and money in those industries, and
mm,
how the animals are really the level of suffering and violence that's kind of hidden. It's often hidden from view by design. There's a level of betrayal that people often have to wrestle with. It's a powerless. It's a it could be paralyzing. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. So it's just like a personal example in my life that I think we're all experiencing in numerous ways, like related to the immigration community, the immigrant rights, and climate protection and animal welfare. There's this sense of betrayal of like, oh, the system is set up to perpetuate the violent conditions and suffering, and is set up to resist efforts on our part
Mm,
to try to change that. And so the level of betrayal has to be reckoned with first. And there's 3 A's there that they talk about in like recovery communities. We come to awareness first, and then acceptance, and then action. And the acceptance part is a very challenging part to, you know, but we can't skip over that awareness, acceptance, and then that's what leads us to clarity about action and what to do about it. So I
mm,
think a lot of us right now in the United States under this current administration, we're flooded with awareness, we're overwhelmed by it. It's coming to
mhm.
acceptance of like, oh, what does this mean? Okay, this is what's actually happening. These are the actual like powers and obstacles we're up against. And we're there. We're like struggling there, and then that clarity of action will come from that.
Yeah. D Going back to the areas of our brain that are in play, it sounds like it's gonna take a little effort after the betrayal to get that upper neocortex in action again. I One of the amazing, powerful moments in Wicked is when Elphaba recognizes that she was wrong to trust the wizard, and her reaction is anger,
Mhm.
and she wants to defy him and bring him down, as she says in the song, no wizard that there ever was, is or was, is ever gonna bring me down." And I'm wondering, obviously, there is anger that comes up when we feel betrayed, and, um, in the US right now with the whole Trump phenomenon that's divided the country, we are angry with each other, depending on which side of this issue, pro-Trump, against him, whatever, you're on, and we're not just angry at the world, we're angry maybe with ourselves or ashamed that we trusted the wrong person, then we're angry with each other. So what do you know, how do you move out of that defying gravity moment? Um, Listen to your body and then what? Because uh,
Right.
mm,
Well, gosh, I'm so resonating with you're describing that physiological experience so well, um and Elphaba's story in that song, like that line in the song, just like I can feel it all through my whole body.
yeah.
Um, and so and also, I would offer that I don't know if moving out of that defiant anger is necessarily the goal. I actually wonder if it's moving through it and then coming to the other side of it and finding a clean fuel in it on the other side. Because some of this shows up to me like it's about grief,
Mm,
because the awareness of like, oh, things really are as bad as they seem. And then the acceptance of like, oh, the violent powers at play right now, like particularly in our country, are as powerful, yeah, as they seem, and as entrenched and intractable as they seem. Tremendous amount of grief that we can't rush through. And I think, a lot of indigenous and the Black community, have known how to lament in ways that the white Western community has not, where we've community or
mm,
culture. Um, and grief. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was, like the original grief researcher, and she was actually not teaching us how to live with grief. She was actually teaching us how to die. That was her research, was on people at the end of life who were dying. But she like, mapped out the stages of grief that start with denial. So it's like a lack of awareness
mm,
or a lack of acceptance, and then
mm,
bargaining, which is like, oh no, it can't possibly be this bad, or like I can do something about this. Here, I'll just give this, and then this will change or whatever. So denial, then bargaining, then anger. Then it's like, oh no, I am powerless and this is as bad as it seems. And I'm enraged by it. And then depression. Then there's a collapse of paralysis. And then finally acceptance. And then we can do something about it. So fortunately or unfortunately, I just don't know that we can rush through that process. So I think what a lot of us are learning to do is help one another with those stages and carve out time for ourselves to move through those stages in a process that will then transform us into people who can act, but who can act non-violently in a compassionate way that holds on to our upper lobe so that we can act in alignment with our values and not the danger is always that we'll become what we're wanting to oppose.
Right.
And so I think you're onto something with this conversation of third things first of like what is the thing that will unify us so that we can um see like our enemies as future friends. That
Yes.
that's the MLK vision.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's so important that you bring up all those different sort of stages, that will go through emotionally when we're grappling with something as big and complex
Mhm.
as political systems and power structures that we feel, have betrayed us somehow. And I'm wondering, how we can one of the things that's making me realize is that I can't just know off the top of my head what stage you're in. When I'm
Exactly.
engaging with other people and I expect, why aren't you an activist? Or why aren't you more angry? Or why aren't you depressed? I hear that from folks because they want to get that mirror back that they're in the right stage or whatever. I don't know what it is. But how can we, I guess one of the keys might be to recognize that, um, to trust that other people are grappling with what is happening right now in their own way.
Yeah. Yes, that's so well said. And I think, you know, we could talk about that more. Like we could do a better job of talking about that collectively. I think it's bringing to mind, like, again, shortly after this administration's reelection, there was a women's march, there was one in Austin. I think there were some all over the country that on that same day. And I did not want to go. And my partner Austin, he's fired up and he's been historically more politically active than I have been, although I'm getting more so now. And he was just like, of course, we would go, and he was wanting to get like everybody, all of our friends, and everybody, like, this is the moment, like we have to, gather together and we have to make our voices heard and show up. And it was I think it was like billed in Austin as like a women's rights rally or something like that. And it was like cold and it was early on a Saturday. And I was just like, I was in more of a depression
Mhm,
stage of
mhm,
grief. And I was like,
mhm,
I don't want to, stand on my feet and be cold. And it's like, and it's like, it's not gonna, it's not gonna make a difference. Or like other people can do this. Like women, this is about women's rights, and women have been fighting this, battle, like, advocating for ourselves for all this time. And here we are in 2025 or 2026, and we're still doing it. And, and so I just was it was a moment for me to find compassion for myself in that
mm,
moment, and also be like, yeah, we need to take turns, like I can appreciate, so many members of Black America are like, rest is resistance. Like I'm going to protect my peace. We've done the, where it's somebody else's turn, and I can appreciate, not everybody is saying that, but the people who are, I'm like, yeah, I completely understand
mhm,
that. And so you're bringing our awareness to, oh, everybody's at a different stage in that grief process, but still moving towards this question of like, what do we do? What is this moment asking of us? and we all have a small part to play. That's a very difficult discernment of like, what is my small part to play?
Thank you for listening to the Naked Truth podcast. Join us next time as we continue to talk with Gena St. David about the intersections of neuroscience, peace building, and what it all means for our political moment. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can get these hopeful conversations in your inbox twice a month.